As South Africa prepares to host the G20 summit, an international group of think tanks has warned the Group of 20 needs to do more than fight fires and reform the broken international system. It says the G20 has consistently failed to tackle the systemic inequalities driving rising debt, climate breakdown, and worsening economic insecurity since it was elevated to a leaders' forum in 2008, a major new independent assessment has found. The new report sets out how the forum that brings together the world's most powerful economies must do more to address the crises shaping everyday lives. To discuss this further, we have on the line Shikwane Warren Makoga, who is co-author of the report from the Institute for Economic Justice. Shikwane, thank you for joining us and a good morning to you.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. I'm great. Good morning to the listeners as well.
We appreciate your time. So, in what ways would you say the G20 has changed from the time of 2008 to how we've seen it now and how it's implemented?
So I wouldn't necessarily say that much has changed fundamentally. It's really like drawing on its main mandate. So you'd remember that the G20 was formed essentially as an economic cooperation organization that really meant to solve and stabilize like financial issues. And over time, bearing the acknowledgement of just how deeply embedded like financial issues would affect other issues, other policy issues, then came in the introduction of the Shepherd Track, which then discusses much broader economic issues outside financial issues. And essentially, what we noticed in our assessment was that there was really an inability on the part of the G20 as a whole to be able to effectively fight the main causes of crisis, what if essentially manifests into financial crisis. So there is very like limited outputs that come in when thinking about what are the systematic causes of like extreme inequality, high unsustainable debt levels, the climate challenge, and really more needs to be done in that regard.
So, what are the key highlights then on the report? You mentioned the concerns there of rising debt, climate breakdown, and economic insecurity. Let's start with those that are around driving rising debt. What does the report find as key factors there?
I mean, it essentially finds that initiatives that the G20 has put out have been rendered very ineffective in the sense that they're not holistic in solving the problem. So you would know that the G20 had launched a debt suspension initiative in 2020. And what we've seen is that because it's voluntary, private creditors have simply not come into the party. So we found ourselves in a situation where countries like Kenya, for instance, had to pay nearly $2 billion to private bondholders, even though it was in a space of seeking temporary relief from debt. And that becomes highly difficult to effectively manage the economy of highly indebted countries if everyone in the debt ecosystem is not participating.
In terms of concerns around climate policies, climate change, climate agendas that come out of the G20 meetings, what are the concerns highlighted by this report?
I mean, the concerns there is effectively the fact that while there's been strong commitments that are made by G20 nations that somewhat mirror some of the commitments made in COP and in the climate space, what we've effectively seen is that it's not consistent because then the very same nations invest trillions in supporting the fossil fuel industry, which effectively causes the climate crisis. So while there's like effectively big talk on like finding solutions, making commitments. We find that countries actually spend more in supporting the fossil fuel industry than they do in actually trying to mitigate the climate crisis.
What should the G20 prioritize when it comes to the worsening economic insecurity that the report also cites as a concern?
I mean, effectively, we need to be very intentional about like moving away from finding solutions that benefit financial institutions and different like corporate companies and literally look at what affects people on the ground, looking at the daily experiences of individuals and how you can shape policies that effectively like make change to daily life.
So, what sort of opportunities does the G20 offer, particularly that it's the first time it's going to be on African soil and South Africa is hosting, besides what South Africa, I guess, will inherit in terms of those challenges and concerns?
All right. So we need to think of South Africa as the fourth edition of a series of presidencies that have been in the global south. And what we have seen is that there was like a power shift because in the G20, there isn't like a secretariat. So really agendas are set by the country that is hosting. And what we've seen is that there's been like a shift since we've had Global South nations holding the presidency from Indonesia to India to Brazil and now in South Africa. And the hope that it provides is that some of the issues that are being highlighted in the report are somewhat finding themselves in the agenda in the South African presidency. Of course, we're noting that while we might be optimistic that like there would be like broader like detail into like policies that actually affect people, that there will be a fundamental shift next year. And maybe I'm preempting what you were going to ask, but with the G20 going to the US, some of the gains that have been seen in the global South leadership have a potential of seeing a regression.
Shikwane, I wish we could talk more, but we are out of time. But thanks so much for your insights. We value them. Where can we get the report? Where is it available?
All right. It is available. You can get the report at the Institute for Economic Justice website, and we are launching it publicly at the Civicus offices in Auckland Park in Johannesburg on the 9th, next week, Wednesday on the 19th.
Okay.
So would really like people interested to highly engage with us.
Thanks again there. Shikwane Warren Makoga, who is co-author of the G20 at a Crossroads report. That's an international group of think tanks who say that we need to see more from the G20. They've raised some concerns. Coming up after Rise and Shine is On the Move, and Palisa is joining us now to tell us what we can